The desperate creativity of Great Depression families produced home innovations so effective that some are quietly making their way back into expensive modern houses, just with fancier names. Back when your great-grandparents lived, keeping food fresh meant digging a hole. Not just any hole, a proper root cellar carved deep below the house where winter's chill and summer's heat couldn't reach. These underground rooms became the family's lifeline. Think about it. No electricity, no humming refrigerator, just thick dirt walls that stayed naturally cool year-round. Families packed their root cellars with bushels of potatoes, crates of apples, and rows of home-canned vegetables. The earth itself became their preservation system. Nearly every household depended on these dark, musty spaces for survival. It makes sense, right? Without them, a bad harvest or spoiled food could mean real hunger. Well, everything changed when electric refrigerators rolled into town. Suddenly, that cramped underground room seemed pointless, but speaking of uncomfortable spaces that families once couldn't live without, after keeping your food cold in the root cellar, nature would eventually call. That meant a trip to the outhouse, a small wooden shack sitting awkwardly in the backyard, usually as far from the main house as possible. Nobody wanted that smell drifting through their kitchen windows. The design was brutally simple. 4 walls, a roof, and a wooden bench with a strategically placed hole. Fancy models might have a crescent moon carved in the door for ventilation. The wealthy ones even had 2 holes, a big one for adults and a smaller one for kids. Talk about luxury. Keeping it clean was a constant battle. Families dumped lime down the hole to fight the odor and flies. Winter visits were particularly memorable. Nothing quite like sitting on a frozen wooden seat at dawn. Indoor plumbing couldn't come fast enough. But before modern heating could warm those new indoor bathrooms, homes needed serious heat sources. Walking from that smelly outhouse back to the house, you probably hear a loud rumbling sound coming from below. That was coal tumbling down a metal chute straight into your basement. The coal man would back his truck up to your house and dump hundreds of pounds of black, dusty fuel through a sidewalk door that led directly to a storage bin downstairs. Your dad spent winter mornings shoveling this coal into a massive furnace that heated the whole house. The furnace room looked like something from a horror movie, covered in black dust with pipes snaking everywhere. Cleaning out the ash was a daily chore that left everyone filthy. Coal dust got into everything, and house fires from overheated furnaces were terrifyingly common. But here's the thing about progress. It doesn't always announce itself with fanfare. Sometimes it just quietly makes your life cleaner. After dealing with coal dust everywhere, homemakers faced another daily battle: wrinkled clothes. Back then, ironing wasn't optional. Every shirt, dress, and tablecloth needed pressing, and families couldn't afford wrinkled appearances. The solution? Built-in ironing board cabinets that folded right into kitchen walls. Pull a handle, and down came your ironing surface. Push it back up when done. Genius, really. These space savers were perfect for cramped homes where every square foot mattered. But here's the thing. Ironing took forever. No permanent press fabrics existed, so everything wrinkled like crazy. Women spent entire afternoons pressing clothes with heavy irons heated on stovetops. The cabinet kept everything tidy between marathon ironing sessions. Well, synthetic fabrics changed everything. Polyester blends meant less ironing, and steam irons made the job faster. Bigger homes gave families actual laundry rooms. Those clever wall cabinets? They became relics, painted over and forgotten behind kitchen renovations. Speaking of clever space-saving tricks, some families took things even further with furniture that completely disappeared. After dealing with coal dust coating every surface, families faced another challenge: fitting everyone into impossibly tiny spaces. The Murphy bed became the ultimate space-saving magic trick during the Great Depression. These ingenious contraptions folded straight up into wall closets, transforming bedrooms into living rooms in seconds. Brilliant, right? One moment you're sleeping, the next you've got floor space for the kids to play or the family to gather. Families crammed into single-room apartments relied on these beds to maintain some dignity and functionality. Well, there was always the risk of the bed slamming down unexpectedly. More than a few people got quite the surprise when poorly installed hardware gave way. But for cash-strapped families, that beat sleeping on the floor. Bigger homes and separate bedrooms eventually made Murphy beds unnecessary. Speaking of keeping things fresh in tight quarters, let's talk about another Depression-era essential that required daily attention: Before electric refrigerators changed everything, families relied on something far more primitive: the icebox. This wasn't just a cooler, it was a wooden cabinet lined with metal that held massive blocks of ice. The ice delivery guy showed up regularly, hauling 25 to 50-pound chunks up your front steps with giant metal tongs. Here's where it gets interesting. That ice didn't last forever. It melted constantly, dripping into a pan underneath that you had to empty daily. Forget to empty it? Hello, kitchen flood. Families packed their food tight around the ice block, playing Tetris with milk bottles and leftover pot roast. The icebox kept things cold, but not frozen, so meal planning was crucial. Well, when electric refrigeration arrived after the Depression, those daily ice deliveries vanished overnight. But the next household challenge was just as demanding. Laundry day wasn't just a chore back then. It was an all-day battle. Metal clotheslines stretched across every backyard like prison wire, ready to hold your soggy surrender flags. First came the mangle wringers, those brutal metal rollers that squeezed water from clothes with enough force to flatten your fingers if you weren't careful. Women fed wet sheets through these contraptions, cranking handles until their arms burned. Then the real fun began, hauling heavy, dripping laundry outside in any weather. January blizzard? Too bad. Those clothes still needed hanging. The wet fabric would freeze solid within minutes, turning shirts into cardboard cutouts. Summer wasn't much better, with scorching sun baking you while you struggled with flapping sheets. Electric dryers changed everything overnight. Suddenly, laundry became a simple toss-and-forget task. But speaking of things that vanished from ceilings, looking up at old houses today, you'll notice flat white ceilings everywhere. But step into certain vintage homes and you might spot something completely different. Elaborate metal tiles with swirls, flowers, and geometric patterns covering the entire ceiling. These tin ceilings weren't just decoration. They solved a real problem. Coal heating left black soot on everything, especially ceilings. Tin was easy to wipe clean with a damp rag. Plus, it wouldn't catch fire like wood or plaster. The weird part is how fancy they looked in otherwise simple kitchens. Families could afford to feel a bit elegant, even on tight budgets. Installing these tiles took serious skill, though. One crooked piece and the whole pattern looked terrible. When cleaner heating arrived and drywall became cheap, craftsmen moved on to easier work. But speaking of heating, those heavy cast iron stoves had their own story to tell. After dealing with tin ceilings covered in soot, families needed something to actually heat their homes. Enter the parlor stove, a hulking cast iron beast that dominated living rooms across America. These weren't just heaters. They were multi-purpose monsters that burned wood or coal while doubling as cooking surfaces. You could boil water, warm soup, or heat your morning coffee right on top. But here's the catch. They required constant attention. Someone had to feed them fuel every few hours or watch the house turn ice cold. The smoke was brutal. Even with a chimney, these stoves filled rooms with a hazy fog that made your eyes water. And forget about heating the whole house. The parlor stayed toasty while bedrooms remained freezing. Central heating systems eventually made these smoky giants unnecessary, but those pull chain lights hanging overhead, they had their own problems. The pull chain light fixture was about as fancy as electricity got for most families back then. One bare bulb dangled from the ceiling with a metal chain hanging down like a dog's leash. You'd yank that chain to turn the light on or off. No wall switches, no dimmer options, just bright or dark. These fixtures showed up everywhere. Basements, bedrooms, closets, even kitchens. They were dirt cheap to install and easy to replace when they burned out. The problem? That harsh, unforgiving light made everyone look like they were being interrogated by the police. And don't get me started on accidentally grabbing that chain in the dark and getting a nice little shock. The real danger came from faulty wiring. Houses weren't built with modern electrical codes, so touching the wrong part could really wake you up fast. But speaking of waking up, families had another basement feature that made laundry day feel like boot camp. After dealing with those pull chain lights upstairs, families had to face another challenge lurking in their basements. Those concrete laundry sinks weren't just washing stations. They were torture devices disguised as household necessities. These massive stone or concrete basins dominated basement corners like ancient altars. Hot water, you carried it down in buckets, one scalding trip at a time. Then came the real workout, scrubbing clothes against metal washboards until your knuckles bled. The ridged surface could shred fabric faster than a cheese grater. Drainage was basically a joke. Water pooled everywhere, creating damp, musty basements that smelled like wet socks mixed with mold. Your back ached, your arms burned, and laundry day felt like running a marathon. Washing machines with automatic drainage changed everything overnight. Suddenly, clean clothes didn't require medieval torture methods. But speaking of basement improvements, wait until you hear about the clever furniture tricks families used upstairs. Those chunky old radiators weren't just eyesores, they were opportunities. Smart homeowners built wooden covers right over them, turning heating equipment into furniture. These weren't flimsy add-ons either. We're talking solid wood construction with cushioned tops that doubled as window seats or storage benches. The genius was simple: hide the ugly metal while creating extra seating in cramped rooms. Families would gather on these warm perches during winter mornings, kids doing homework while soaking up heat. The covers had vents to let warmth circulate, so you got the best of both worlds. Then there's the social aspect. These radiator benches became the household's prime real estate on cold days. Everyone fought for the spot closest to the heat source. Modern forced air systems and baseboard heating made these clever covers disappear, but they solved a real problem with style. Speaking of clever kitchen solutions, breakfast nooks took space saving to another level entirely. These cozy corner dining spots were pure genius for cramped kitchens. Built right into the wall with benches on two sides and a fixed table, breakfast nooks turned dead corner space into the heart of morning routines. Kids scrambled in for cereal before school while mom sipped coffee by the window. The benches usually had storage underneath, perfect for hiding table linens or the good china nobody ever used. Most nooks faced east to catch morning sunlight, making even the dreariest winter day feel brighter. Families squeezed together on those hard wooden benches, elbows bumping as they reached for the jam. No fancy dining room needed when you had this intimate little gathering spot. But here's the thing about small spaces. They only work when everything else stays small too. As kitchens grew bigger and families wanted more flexibility, these charming nooks got ripped out. Speaking of communication getting more flexible, let's talk about how families handled their single telephone. Most families had just one phone, and it lived in its own little architectural shrine. These wall telephone alcoves were carved out niches, usually tucked into hallways or kitchen corners, designed specifically for that heavy black rotary monster. The booth wasn't just practical, it was survival. When Aunt Martha called to gossip for an hour, you needed somewhere to lean. Those old receivers weighed about as much as a small dumbbell. Your arm would go numb halfway through any decent conversation. Privacy was the real selling point, though. The alcove had a tiny built-in seat and sometimes even a shelf for the phone book. You could duck inside, close yourself off from kitchen chaos, and actually hear what someone was saying. But here's the weird part. Families treated phone time like sacred ritual. Multiple phones in every room seemed impossible back then. Speaking of impossible things, let's talk about another vanishing convenience that required its own special door. Walk up to any old house and you might spot a tiny door built right into the wall. No, it wasn't for cats or secret messages. This was a milk door, and it made morning deliveries effortless. The milkman would arrive before dawn, slide fresh bottles through the outer door, and families could grab them from inside without stepping into freezing weather. Pretty clever, right? These mini doorways also handled eggs, butter, and cream deliveries. Some even had small insulated compartments to keep everything cold. But here's the thing. Milk doors only worked when deliveries happened daily. Once supermarkets took over and families started driving to buy groceries, these little portals became pointless. Most got sealed up or turned into decorative features. Speaking of water, families back then had another ingenious way to collect what they needed. Big wooden barrels stationed under gutters weren't just decoration, they were lifelines. When the sky opened up, families scrambled to position these rain catchers perfectly. Every drop mattered. The water wasn't crystal clear like today's tap water. Leaves, bird droppings, and mystery debris floated on top. But after straining through cloth, it worked fine for washing clothes, scrubbing floors, and watering vegetable gardens. Some folks even used it to flush their outdoor privies. Drinking rainwater? That required boiling first. Smart families knew better than to trust what fell from the sky without proper treatment. Then there's the mosquito problem nobody talks about. Standing water bred clouds of the little vampires. Covering barrels became essential unless you wanted your backyard turned into a bug nursery. City water lines changed everything. Why collect rainwater when clean water flowed endlessly from indoor faucets? But speaking of indoor conveniences, that vanished. Walk down any hallway from the 1930s and you'd find something modern homes completely abandoned. Linen closets packed with built-in drawers. These weren't just shelves thrown together. Deep wooden drawers slid out smooth as butter, each one designed to hold sheets, towels, and thick blankets that families actually mended instead of replacing. Every inch mattered back then. Space was tight, money was tighter. These closets turned narrow hallways into storage gold mines. Sliding doors kept everything dust-free, while wooden runners made accessing linens effortless. Well, most of the time. The weird part is how much stuff people actually stored in there. Hand-sewn quilts, tablecloths for special occasions, even spare curtains. Makes sense when fabric was precious and throwing things away seemed wasteful. Then walk-in closets became the standard. Suddenly, these clever hallway solutions looked cramped and old-fashioned. But speaking of clever space solutions, indoor ventilation had its own ingenious tricks. Ever notice how stuffy old houses get? Well, our great-grandparents had a clever fix. Transom windows. These tiny glass panels sat right above interior doors, and they weren't just decorative. Push them open with a long stick, and suddenly air could flow between rooms like magic. Before electric fans existed, these little windows were lifesavers during humid summers. They fought off mold, reduced stuffiness, and kept the whole house breathing properly. The weird part is how simple yet effective they were. Just a small hinged window doing the job of modern HVAC systems. Most people today have never even heard of transoms. We've got sealed doors and central air now, so who needs them? But back then, they were as essential as light switches. Speaking of outdoor spaces, families had another ingenious way to beat the heat. Summer heat before air conditioning meant one thing. Everybody lived on the porch. But these weren't just regular porches. They had fabric canopies stretched overhead like giant umbrellas, creating shaded havens from brutal afternoon sun. The real magic happened with porch swings. Families would spend entire evenings swaying back and forth, catching whatever breeze decided to show up. Neighbors walked by and actually stopped to chat instead of rushing past like today. Kids played on the steps while parents discussed everything from crops to gossip. Well, these porches basically served as outdoor living rooms. The canopy fabric needed constant replacing after winter storms tore it apart. Then came air conditioning after World War II, and suddenly everyone retreated indoors. The porch swing conversations died out, replaced by the hum of cooling units. But what about when families needed to sleep outdoors entirely? Before fancy wallpaper became affordable, families got creative with hand-painted borders and wall stencils. These decorative bands ran along ceilings, around doorways, or halfway up walls. Why spend money on expensive wallpaper when you could grab a brush and make your own patterns? The designs told stories. Farm families painted corn stalks and wheat. City folks went for geometric shapes or floral vines. Some borders covered up smoke stains from kerosene lamps or hid where old wallpaper had peeled away. Smart thinking, really. Making stencils was an art form. Mothers cut patterns from cardboard, then dabbed paint through the holes with sponges or brushes. Kids helped hold the stencil steady. One wobbly hand, and the whole pattern went crooked. Then came peel-and-stick wallpaper and paint rollers. Suddenly, anyone could redecorate without artistic talent. But speaking of creativity, families found another clever way to beat the heat during sweltering summer nights. Making ice cream at home used to be a full-contact sport. Those wooden churns with their metal buckets weren't just kitchen gadgets, they were family torture devices disguised as dessert makers. Rock salt and ice went around the outside, while cream, sugar, and vanilla got locked inside the metal canister. Then came the real fun. Someone had to crank that handle for 30 solid minutes while the mixture slowly turned into something edible. Kids would take turns until their arms gave out. Dad would grunt through his shift. Mom would silently judge everyone's technique while secretly planning to buy store-bought next time. The worst part? All that work for maybe 2 bowls of ice cream that melted faster than you could eat it. When electric freezers hit the scene, these wooden contraptions vanished overnight. But speaking of vanishing comforts, wait until you hear about sleeping porches. When summer heat turned bedrooms into ovens, families had a clever escape plan. They'd head to screened sleeping porches, outdoor rooms wrapped in mesh that caught every breeze while keeping mosquitoes at bay. These weren't just regular porches with a few screens tacked on. Nope, they were specifically designed bedrooms without walls, usually built on the second floor where air moved better and you felt safer from prowlers. Picture an entire family dragging mattresses and pillows outside every sweltering night. Kids loved the adventure of sleeping under the stars, listening to crickets and distant train whistles. Parents appreciated finally getting rest without suffocating indoors. The screens kept out flying pests, but let in cooling night air that no indoor room could match. Then air conditioning arrived and changed everything. Suddenly, sleeping outdoors seemed primitive when you could stay cool inside with the flip of a switch. But speaking of keeping things out, walking between rooms used to involve pushing through heavy fabric curtains called portiers. These weren't just decorative touches, they were essential climate control before anyone figured out proper insulation. Portiers hung in doorways like theater curtains, trapping precious heat during winter months. When coal was expensive and drafts were everywhere, a thick curtain could mean the difference between a warm kitchen and a freezing parlor. Smart homemakers chose dense fabrics that blocked cold air but could be swept aside when needed. The weird part is how they doubled as dust barriers. Coal furnaces and dirt roads created constant grime, so portiers kept the worst of it contained to one room. Plus, they added a splash of color to otherwise plain doorways. But here's what really made them disappear: solid doors and weather stripping. Once homes got proper sealing, these fabric barriers became unnecessary. Speaking of unnecessary features, wait until you hear about the elaborate sewing setups families once built right into their walls. Every house had that perfect little corner where mom could disappear with her Singer sewing machine. These built-in sewing nooks weren't just furniture, they were command centers for family survival. Cubbies held patterns cut from newspaper. Drawers kept buttons saved from worn-out shirts. Everything had its place because wasting space meant wasting money. The weird part is how much these tiny alcoves actually saved families. A torn dress became a child's skirt. Old curtains turned into dish towels. Flour sacks, perfect for underwear. Makes sense when you realize ready-made clothes cost a fortune back then. These nooks usually sat near a window for natural light. No electric sewing machines meant everything was foot-powered. Your leg got quite the workout finishing a quilt. But here's something that might surprise you about water and how entire neighborhoods shared one simple solution. Back when neighborhoods actually knew each other, most blocks shared one crucial piece of equipment: the community water pump. These heavy iron contraptions served entire streets, and everyone took turns working that long handle up and down until their arms ached. Kids got assigned pump duty after school. You'd see them lined up with buckets, waiting their turn like it was some kind of water lottery. Winter made everything worse. Pumps froze solid overnight, and somebody had to pour hot water on the mechanism just to get it working again. The weird part? Nobody trusted the water straight from the pump. Every drop had to be boiled before drinking or cooking. Makes you appreciate turning a handle and getting clean water instantly. When indoor plumbing finally arrived, those community pumps became expensive lawn decorations nobody wanted.